bombardment of Iwo Jima reached a crescendo on D-Day, as the first waves of Marines prepared.
The sea was calm that morning, too calm for war. At first light, the horizon bled faintly crimson, a thin glow over the endless Pacific. Aboard hundreds of landing craft, U.S. Marines waited in silence, their helmets low, their rifles wrapped in salt-stained hands. The air smelled of diesel and fear. Engines rumbled softly beneath the whisper of the surf. Ahead lay Iwo Jima, a dark volcanic speck rising from the sea like a wound. Its beaches looked still, untouched, lifeless. But the men had been warned. Nothing on that island was truly dead. Beneath the black sand and jagged rock, the Japanese waited, unseen, unheard, unmoving. Deep tunnels honeycombed the island's core, filled with rifles, mortars, and men who had sworn to die where they stood. Then, at 6:40 a.m., the sea erupted. Naval guns thundered in unison, the earth itself trembling as destroyers and battleships unleashed a firestorm. Columns of smoke rolled skyward, merging with the morning haze. When the barrage stopped, silence returned, thick, unnatural. And then, from the mist, the first wave of landing craft began to move. By early 1945, the Pacific War had entered its most desperate stage. For nearly 4 years, Japan's empire had been shrinking, piece by piece, island by island, under the relentless pressure of American sea power and air supremacy. The once invincible Imperial Navy lay shattered, and Japan's defensive perimeter had collapsed from the Gilberts to the Philippines. But one island, small and isolated, stood directly in the path of America's final assault. Iwo Jima. Barely 8 square miles of volcanic rock, Iwo Jima was a barren fortress rising out of the ocean halfway between the Mariana Islands and Tokyo. To the U.S. military, it was a critical stepping stone, an emergency landing field for damaged B-29 superfortresses returning from bombing runs over Japan, and a forward base for fighter escorts that would soon strike the home islands themselves. To Japan, it was sacred ground, the first fragment of home soil threatened by invasion. After the loss of Saipan in 1944, Tokyo knew the tide had turned. American bombers were now reaching the Japanese mainland with devastating precision. Iwo Jima, located roughly 750 miles from Tokyo, became both a shield and a symbol. If it fell, Japan's heartland would lie exposed to direct attack. If it held, perhaps, just perhaps, the empire could still force a negotiated peace through unbearable resistance. The man chosen to defend it was Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, a career officer educated in the United States, fluent in English and respected for his intelligence. Unlike many of his peers, Kuribayashi understood the scale of American industrial might. He knew Japan could not win the war through attrition or glory. But he also knew that honor demanded the defense of Iwo Jima to the last man. His orders from Tokyo were absolute. No surrender, no survivors, no retreat. Kuribayashi transformed Iwo Jima into a fortress unlike any the Americans had faced. Rather than meeting the invaders at the shoreline, a tactic that had failed disastrously on Saipan and Tarawa, he devised a new strategy: fight from underground. Under his direction, thousands of soldiers carved an intricate labyrinth of tunnels, caves, and pillboxes into the island's volcanic rock. The system stretched for miles, linking artillery positions, command posts, and sleeping quarters deep beneath the surface. From these hidden chambers, the Japanese could move unseen, reappear where least expected, and fire upon U.S. Marines from multiple angles. The centerpiece of the island was Mount Suribachi, a 550-foot volcanic cone dominating the southern end. From its heights, Japanese observers could see nearly every inch of beach and landing approach. The mountain became both fortress and tomb, laced with guns, mortars, and interlocking fields of fire. Meanwhile, the Americans prepared Operation Detachment, a massive amphibious assault designed to seize the island within a week. Nearly 70,000 Marines of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Marine Divisions were assigned to the task, supported by one of the largest naval armadas ever assembled in the Pacific. Over 500 ships, including battleships, cruisers, carriers, and destroyers. Against them stood Kuribayashi's 21,000 defenders, most of whom had already written farewell letters home. In Washington and Pearl Harbor, planners estimated Iwo Jima could be captured in 5 days. American intelligence, unaware of the underground labyrinth, believed the Japanese defenses to be limited and fragmented. The pre-invasion bombardment, lasting 3 days, was expected to annihilate nearly all resistance. But deep beneath the surface, the Japanese listened as thousands of shells rained down, shaking the tunnels like distant thunder. Hardly a soldier was killed. The bombardment, though immense, barely scratched the rock. Kuribayashi forbade his men from firing a single shot during the shelling. He wanted the Marines to believe the island was dead, to walk ashore into the jaws of an unseen enemy. As February 19th approached, the contrast between the two sides could not have been greater. Above ground, the U.S. Navy ruled the waves, confident in its overwhelming firepower. Below ground, Japanese soldiers sat in suffocating darkness, clutching their rifles, awaiting the inevitable. They did not expect to live, but they expected to kill as many Marines as possible before they died. When dawn broke over the Pacific, every gun was ready, every tunnel manned, every machine gun sighted on the black sands below Mount Suribachi. Kuribayashi's final orders had been simple and absolute. You will not die until you have killed 10 of the enemy. The stage was set for one of the bloodiest battles of the Second World War, a clash that would redefine the meaning of courage, sacrifice, and futility on both sides. The island of Iwo Jima was unlike any the U.S. Marines had faced before. From above, it looked almost lifeless, a barren stretch of volcanic ash and sulfuric rock, swept by relentless Pacific winds. There were no jungles to conceal movement, no rivers to cross, no civilians to rescue, only heat, dust, and the overpowering stench of sulfur rising from vents that hissed like wounds in the earth. The beaches that would soon become famous were made not of sand but of crushed volcanic ash. Fine, black and soft, swallowing boots and machinery alike. Every step sank knee-deep, every movement slow, exhausting, and exposed. For the Marines, it would be like storming a furnace. For the Japanese, it was perfect killing ground. From his underground command post near the northern plateau, General Kuribayashi studied every inch of the island. He understood that he could not stop the Americans from landing. Their naval power was absolute, but he could make them pay for every yard of ground. His strategy broke from tradition. No suicidal beach charges, no wasteful last stands at the shoreline. Instead, his men would wait, hidden, until the beaches were crowded with American troops and vehicles. Then they would open fire all at once, unleashing chaos. By February 18th, the day before the invasion, Kuribayashi's defenses were complete. Over 750 reinforced bunkers, connected by 11 miles of tunnels, honeycombed the island. Each position had overlapping fields of fire. Hidden artillery, mortar pits, and machine gun nests were carefully camouflaged with volcanic rock. The men inside were seasoned, disciplined, and resigned to die. Many carried family photos sewn into their tunics, reminders of a home they would never see again. On the other side of the sea, aboard the U.S. Navy's warships, tension ran thick. For days, American battleships had pounded the island. In a storm of steel, more than 22,000 otters, shells and rockets, in one of the heaviest pre-invasion bombardments of the Pacific War. But when the smoke cleared, the island still stood. Reconnaissance pilots reported minimal visible damage. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, overseeing the amphibious fleet, grew uneasy. He extended the bombardment another day, but time was running out. Every delay meant more fuel, more exposure, and more uncertainty. Meanwhile, the 5th Marine Division under Major General Keller Rocky prepared for their first combat test. Veterans from earlier campaigns warned them that Iwo Jima would be different, a place where the enemy was everywhere and nowhere. In the briefing rooms aboard their transports, officers traced the landing zones: green beach at the base of Mount Suribachi for the 5th Division, red and yellow beaches for the 4th Division in the center. Blue beach on the right flank. For the 3rd Division, the objective was simple on paper: seize the southern airfield on the first day, then push north to capture the island within a week. But few would realize until too late how unrealistic those orders were. At dawn on February 19, 1945, the naval bombardment ceased. For hours, the sky had burned orange as shells exploded across Iwo Jima, shrouding it in fire and smoke. When the guns fell silent, a deceptive calm returned. From their ships, Marines could see only drifting smoke and black ash. The island appeared destroyed. Commanders gave the order to land. At 8:59 a.m., the first wave of amphibious tractors began to move. Across a sea thick with diesel fumes and salt spray, wave after wave of Marines advanced toward the beaches. 30,000 men in the first assault. Some joked nervously. Others prayed. The roar of naval engines drowned out everything except the pounding of their hearts. From the shoreline, there was no sign of life. No gunfire, no movement. The Marines, expecting chaos, met only silence as they jumped into the ash and stumbled forward. The first minutes were surreal, eerie, almost peaceful. They began digging in, dragging equipment up the soft slopes. Officers shouted, "Maybe they're all dead." But beneath the ground, Suribachi watched and waited. He had ordered every man to hold fire until the beaches were packed, until every target was visible. Only then, when the Americans were most vulnerable, would the island come alive. By mid-morning, more than 1,000 Marines and vehicles crowded the lower slopes of the beach. The volcanic ash clung to everything. Tanks bogged down. Artillery pieces sank. The smell of sulfur and smoke choked the air. And then, at 10:01 a.m., Dadinkin Tan Fidudi Beibrin, the mountain exploded. From the slopes of Suribachi and the hidden cliffs beyond, the Japanese opened fire with everything they had: artillery, mortars, machine guns. The entire island erupted in flame and steel. Within seconds, the calm beach became a killing ground. The impenetrable island had awakened. For the Japanese defenders of Iwo Jima, this island was more than a strategic position. It was the line between life and extinction, the first touch of homeland soil under direct attack. Every man stationed there understood what it meant. They were not expected to survive. They were expected to buy time for Japan's crumbling empire with their lives. In letters later recovered from the tunnels, soldiers wrote words like prayers. "I will fight until I become a spirit watching over the emperor." Another wrote to his wife, "When you see the stars, think of me standing watch over our homeland." They lived underground in unbearable heat, the stench of sulfur and sweat thick in the air, sleeping beside ammunition crates and corpses that could not be buried. Yet there was no rebellion, no panic, only duty, and the promise of death with honor. General Suribachi forbade the traditional banzai charges that had doomed so many before them. Instead, he taught his men to fight silently, patiently, efficiently. Kill one, move, hide, and kill again. It was an alien form of warfare to Marines accustomed to an enemy who screamed and charged. On Iwo Jima, death came from silence. For the U.S. Marines, that silence was almost worse than combat. The first waves had landed expecting victory. But within minutes, the illusion collapsed. Machine gun fire shredded the beach. Mortars burst overhead, spraying hot fragments across the ash. Men fell without seeing who shot them. Radios screamed for medics, for artillery, for help that couldn't come fast enough. And through it all, they kept moving. They were trained not to stop. Young men, some barely 19, crawling through sand that swallowed their boots, dragging wounded comrades toward cover that didn't exist. In their minds, the island became a living thing, a monster that devoured everything thrown at it. The Marines would later describe the smell: sulfur, gunpowder, blood, the taste of ash in their teeth, the sound of unseen rifles echoing from tunnels beneath their feet. Some spoke of seeing faces, fleeting shadows through smoke, indistinguishable between friend and foe. In the chaos of Iwo Jima, the line between courage and fear blurred completely. They fought not for territory, but for survival. From the moment the Marines stepped ashore, they were fighting an enemy they could not see. Kuribayashi's underground fortress turned the entire island into a death trap. Machine guns, mortars, and artillery were dug into the slopes at angles that defied logic. Every approach was covered, every escape anticipated. The Japanese had spent months studying the island's geography, turning its natural features into weapons. Each bunker was connected to several others through tunnel systems that allowed defenders to retreat, regroup, and reappear unexpectedly. When American flamethrowers or grenades destroyed a pillbox, gunfire would resume from another one nearby, often from behind. The Marines began to call it the Invisible War. Traditional assault tactics, wave attacks, concentrated fire, open advances, failed immediately. The 4th and 5th Marine Divisions found themselves pinned down by unseen guns, unable to move. Commanders tried to direct naval gunfire in support, but even direct hits seemed useless. The Japanese simply vanished underground, waited for the bombardment to pass, and then emerged again, unbroken. For the Americans, the solution came painfully and slowly. Flamethrowers, demolitions, and tanks fitted with flame projectors became the only reliable weapons against tunnels. Teams of engineers crawled forward with hoses of burning fuel, clearing positions one by one. It was brutal, intimate, and relentless. Inside the tunnels, fire consumed everything: oxygen, light, and sound. The Marines began calling it Rat War. No mercy, no distance, no time to think. Despite overwhelming firepower, progress was measured in yards. A single hill could take days to capture. The volcanic terrain offered no water, no shade, and no rest. Marines dug foxholes that filled with hot ash. Every night, Japanese raiding parties crawled through the darkness to infiltrate American lines, throwing grenades and vanishing again. There was no front, no rear, only chaos in every direction. Kuribayashi's plan was working. The longer the battle lasted, the more American lives it claimed. He had turned Iwo Jima into a grinder of flesh and spirit, a place where bravery was no longer about victory, but endurance. By the second day, the beaches were lined with burning vehicles and bodies. The air shimmered with heat. Marines stopped noticing the smell of death. It was everywhere. Some stopped speaking altogether, moving mechanically from one position to the next. Letters home described the island as a place from another world. One Marine wrote, "How sturdsidan fide to triden." It's like fighting inside a volcano that never stops breathing fire. What held them together was the unspoken bond of survival. Medics worked under fire, crawling through ash to reach the wounded. Chaplains prayed beside makeshift graves dug between shell holes. Engineers cleared mines with their bare hands. And above it all, the thunder of naval guns never ceased, constant, deafening, desperate. Still, no one on Iwo Jima believed in an easy victory anymore. Every hill conquered revealed another fortress, another maze of tunnels, another ambush waiting. The Japanese fought not for ground, but for time. and every hour they delayed, the Americans brought Japan's homeland 1 hour closer to preparation. But within that inferno, both sides shared the same condition: exhaustion, hunger, and fear hidden behind obedience. Whether under the rising sun or the stars and stripes, each man understood the same truth. No one was leaving this island untouched. And yet, even through the carnage, humanity flickered. Marines risked their lives to pull strangers from the fire. Japanese soldiers shared water from captured canteens before dying. Small acts of mercy appeared like sparks in the darkness, reminders that war, even here, could not erase the soul entirely. The black sands of Iwo Jima were consuming both sides, but the storm was far from over. Because at the heart of the island, beneath the smoke and flame, Mount Suribachi still stood, watching, waiting to test the courage of every man below it. War on Iwo Jima pushed technology to its breaking point. Every weapon, every machine, every tactic evolved in real time, forged by necessity. The Americans had brought the full weight of modern warfare: naval artillery, aircraft carriers, tanks, rocket launchers, and engineering teams equipped for any terrain. But on Iwo Jima, nothing worked as it should. The volcanic ash neutralized everything. Tanks bogged down within meters of the surf. Bulldozers and half-tracks sank halfway to their hulls. Even small arms jammed with grit. The air, thick with sulfur and dust, turned machine guns into choking furnaces. The Marines had expected a conventional battle: seize the beach, push inland, take the high ground. Instead, they were fighting inside a fortress carved from solid rock. It was warfare stripped of maneuver, reduced to demolition and survival. The U.S. Navy's battleships and cruisers unleashed some of the most concentrated bombardments in history. From the USS Tennessee to the USS Nevada, their guns hurled one-ton shells that vaporized everything above ground. Yet, as the Marines discovered, most of the island's defenses were underground, perfectly preserved. Kuribayashi's engineers had burrowed as deep as 75 feet into the rock. When the shelling stopped, Japanese gunners simply emerged, reloaded, and resumed firing. So the Marines adapted. Flamethrower tanks, like the M4 Sherman Zippo, became the weapon of choice. They could project a stream of burning fuel up to 150 feet, consuming bunkers and tunnels in seconds. Infantrymen followed close behind, sealing entrances with explosives and grenades. The brutal rhythm of Iwo Jima became almost mechanical. Locate, burn, seal, move. Air power, too, played a constant role. Carrier-based fighters and bombers circled overhead, strafing open ground and softening cave mouths with rockets. But even air supremacy could not see beneath the surface. The island's smoke and ash often obscured targets entirely. Pilots spoke of attacking ghosts, firing into holes that vanished as soon as they appeared. The Japanese, meanwhile, had their own technological ingenuity. Their Type 96 anti-aircraft guns, repurposed as anti-tank weapons, devastated the Marines' armor. Hidden mortars and recoilless rifles targeted supply zones and medical stations. Some artillery was mounted on rails, allowing gunners to fire and retreat deep into tunnels before counter-battery fire could locate them. This constant evolution of weapon and counter-weapon turned Iwo Jima into a living laboratory of death, a place where tactics changed by the hour, and survival depended on invention. In the words of one Marine engineer, every yard cost a new idea, and a dozen men. Behind the carnage stood two men who would never meet: Lieutenant General Tadamichi Kuribayashi and Lieutenant General Holland M. Howlin' Mad. Smith. Kuribayashi, beneath the ground, commanded with calm precision. He never shouted, never allowed emotion to dictate orders. He moved silently through the tunnels, inspecting defenses, writing farewell letters in moments of quiet. His men revered him, not as a symbol of fanaticism, but as a leader who shared their fate. He refused to die by suicide until the battle's end, believing his duty was to inflict the greatest possible delay. His tactical genius was unconventional, even controversial in Tokyo. He banned banzai charges, arguing that wasted lives accomplished nothing. He ordered his men to fight intelligently, use the tunnels, conserve ammunition, and make every shot count. The Japanese high command expected Iwo Jima to fall in a day or two. Kuribayashi held it for over a month. Above ground, Howlin' Mad Smith faced a nightmare of his own. He had led Marines through Tarawa and Saipan, but nothing compared to this. The intelligence failures, the unending resistance, the mounting casualties, all weighed heavily on him. Reports poured in, units cut off, flamethrowers running dry, tanks lost in ash. Smith was relentless but not blind. He understood that victory here was not measured in territory, but endurance. When correspondents asked about the enemy, Smith simply said, "They're the best soldiers we've ever fought." In that acknowledgement lay a grim respect between commanders who would never exchange words, only bullets through layers of rock and fire. Beneath the strategy, beyond the tactics, lay the unspoken moral weight of Iwo Jima. The battle was not merely about ground or airfields, it was about belief. For the Japanese, dying on Iwo Jima meant preserving the dignity of the emperor and the spirit of Bushido. For the Americans, surviving meant fulfilling the oath of the Marine Corps. Never leave a comrade behind. Kuribayashi's men obeyed orders to the letter. Many tied grenades to their chests, ready to detonate if captured. Others waited in silence for tanks to roll past, emerging only to fire a final shot before disappearing back into the earth. To them, surrender was worse than death. But even among the defenders, doubt existed. Letters found later in the ruins spoke of exhaustion and sorrow. One soldier wrote, "I am not afraid to die, but I wish I could see Japan once more. My mother must think of me often." On the other side, Marines began to question the cost of the island. Entire platoons vanished. Medics broke down in tears beside men they couldn't save. Some began to understand that courage was not the absence of fear, but its endurance. The morality of the battle blurred with every passing day. The line between necessity and brutality disappeared. Flamethrowers turned caves into tombs. Hand grenades silenced cries that no one wanted to hear. In the end, both sides were trapped by their own codes: duty, obedience, honor, all leading to the same fate. By the second week, Iwo Jima had ceased to be a place. It had become an idea, the embodiment of sacrifice itself, and both nations, though enemies, would carry its shadow for generations to come. The black sands burned hotter with each passing day. Smoke drifted endlessly over the Pacific, marking the island as both prize and grave. And in the center of it all, Mount Suribachi loomed, the volcano that would soon witness one of the most iconic moments in human history. At dawn on February 23, 1945, the island was still burning. For 4 days, the U.S. Marines had fought inch by inch across Iwo Jima's southern plain. They had clawed their way through fire and ash, through tunnels that seemed endless, through positions that refused to die. The beaches behind them were a graveyard of twisted metal, charred tanks, and the bodies of friends buried under black sand. Yet ahead of them rose the mountain, Mount Suribachi, the volcanic heart of the island. Its slopes were scarred by shell fire, its peak shrouded in smoke. Every Marine who looked toward it understood its meaning. From the summit, the Japanese could direct artillery across the entire southern beachhead. To take Suribachi was to cripple the enemy's eyes. To fail was to let every man below remain in their crosshairs. General Keller Rocky's 5th Marine Division was given the task. The men of the 28th Regiment, led by Lieutenant Colonel Chandler Johnson, began the assault. The climb was steep, the ground loose beneath their boots, and every ridge a potential trap. Machine gun bursts echoed from hidden caves, mortar shells burst in clouds of black sand, and the smell of sulfur thickened as they ascended. The Marines moved slowly, methodically. Every few meters, flamethrower teams advanced to clear bunkers carved into the mountain's face. Engineers sealed tunnel mouths with explosives. The mountain itself seemed alive, every explosion a breath, every crater a wound. And still, the defenders fought on. Inside Suribachi, Japanese troops moved through the tunnels like shadows. They had vowed to defend the mountain to the last man. Kuribayashi's plan was working exactly as intended. Every hour the Americans spent on Suribachi was an hour his northern defenses could prepare for the next phase. But despite everything, despite the snipers, the heat, and the endless shelling, the Marines continued upward. Inch by inch, they gained ground, climbing through smoke and ash. Each step cost lives. Men vanished into craters, swallowed by explosions. Yet others pressed forward, driven not by orders now, but by something deeper. The will to finish what so many had died to begin. By mid-morning, small patrols reached the rim. At 10:20 a.m., a group of Marines from Easy Company, led by First Lieutenant Harold Schreier, reached the summit of Mount Suribachi. They carried a small American flag taken from one of the landing ships below. When they raised it on a piece of iron pipe, the battle briefly paused. From the beaches below, Marines erupted in cheers. Ships offshore blew their horns, their crews shouting and waving from the decks. For the first time in 5 days, there was something other than fear on Iwo Jima. Something that felt like hope. Photographer Lewis Lowery captured that first flag raising, his camera filled with smoke and wind. But even as he descended the mountain, the fight resumed. Japanese troops hidden in the caves counterattacked, forcing the Marines to defend their newly claimed peak. The mountain still belonged to no one. Later that afternoon, another patrol, this one carrying a larger flag, began its climb. It was led by Sergeant Michael Strank, Corporal Harlan Block, Private First Class Franklin Sousley, Private First Class René Gagnon, and Private First Class Ira Hayes, among others. They reached the summit shortly after noon. The fighting had quieted, but the air was still heavy with the sound of distant gunfire. At 12:15 p.m., they raised the second flag, larger, brighter, visible to every man still fighting below. Photographer Joe Rosenthal caught the moment on film, an image of 6 men frozen in motion, straining together against the wind to plant the symbol of their struggle. It would become one of the most iconic photographs in history. Not of victory, but of endurance. For the Marines on the beach, the sight of that flag was more than inspiration. It was proof that they had survived the impossible. Men stopped where they stood, staring up at the mountain. Some wept, others saluted. The battle was far from over, but for a brief moment, the black sands of Iwo Jima felt sacred. Below the mountain, however, Kuribayashi remained unbroken. His northern defenses, the ridges, the airfields, the honeycomb of bunkers, were untouched. He had expected Suribachi to fall. It was never meant to be the end. His true line of defense stretched through the center of the island, in a series of ridges and strongholds that would soon make Suribachi look like a prelude. As night fell on February 23rd, the flag still flew over Mount Suribachi, whipping in the cold Pacific wind. The Marines at its base huddled in foxholes, exhausted, staring at the distant northern horizon. The battle, they realized, had only just begun. The fall of Mount Suribachi did not mark victory. It marked escalation. With the mountain secured, the Marines turned north, toward the main Japanese defensive line. What awaited them was a labyrinth of bunkers, tunnels, and pillboxes that stretched across the center of the island. From Hill 382 to the Motoyama airfields, General Kuribayashi's genius became clear here. Every inch of terrain had been chosen for its killing power. His men fought from hidden positions that could not be seen until they fired. And by then, it was too late. Each ridge was covered by interlocking fields of fire, every cave connected to another by unseen passages. Even when a position was taken, machine gun fire would suddenly erupt from behind, as if the ground itself had come alive. By late February, the Marines of the 3rd, 4th, and 5th Divisions were fighting inside a nightmare. Their enemy rarely exposed himself. Mortar rounds fell from invisible sources. Snipers fired from unseen holes in the rock. The volcanic dust turned every movement into agony, clinging to skin, choking the wounded, blinding the living. On February 25th, the Marines pushed toward the Motoyama No. 2 airfield, a flat expanse of shattered rock that had already claimed hundreds of lives. Tanks crawled forward under fire, their treads slipping in the sand. Engineers followed, clearing mines and flamethrower teams sealing bunkers one by one. Every bunker they destroyed seemed to uncover another. The Japanese defense, though shrinking, never faltered. The 77th Infantry Division arrived to reinforce the assault. By March 1st, the central airfield was in American hands, but at a cost that shocked even veteran commanders. Thousands of Marines lay dead or wounded. Litter-bearers carried stretchers through clouds of sulfuric dust, the air filled with the constant drone of artillery. Still, the attack pressed on. The next objective, Hill 362A and the amphitheater, two positions that formed the core of Kuribayashi's northern defense. The terrain was brutal, steep ridges and ravines filled with booby traps and machine guns. The Marines called it the meat grinder. Fighting here devolved into chaos. Units became scattered, leadership blurred, and progress was measured in feet. A squad could take a trench in the morning and lose it by afternoon. Mortar shells burst continuously, showering black ash and fragments of bone. The wounded screamed for corpsmen who rarely made it through the fire. Even when the flamethrowers cleared a cave, the enemy would emerge from another tunnel, striking from the rear. On March 3rd, Marines of the 5th Division reached the northwest coast, cutting the island in half. Yet Kuribayashi still fought on. His communications had been severed, his supplies exhausted, but his men continued to resist, refusing to surrender. Even the wounded fired pistols from their stretchers. For days, American commanders assumed the battle was nearing its end. But every time they declared the island secured, Japanese soldiers erupted from hidden tunnels to fight again. The last airfield, Motoyama No. 3, was finally taken on March 10th, but still, the gunfire did not stop. That night, Kuribayashi sent his final message to Tokyo. It was brief. He reported that his positions were destroyed, that communication was impossible, and that he and his men would now engage in final offensive action. No surrender, no retreat. 2 nights later, on March 25th, the last great Banzai attack began. Hundreds of Japanese soldiers, officers, engineers, and even medical personnel emerged from the tunnels under cover of darkness. Armed with rifles, bayonets, and grenades, they charged into the rear of the American lines. The 5th Pioneer Battalion and elements of the 28th Regiment bore the brunt of the assault. The night turned into chaos. Hand-to-hand combat in the dark, bayonets clashing, men fighting with entrenching tools and fists. Trucks burned, tents collapsed, and the roar of small arms fire echoed across the airfield. By dawn, over 800 Japanese soldiers lay dead. Nearly 100 Marines were killed, and hundreds more wounded. Kuribayashi's body was never found. Some say he died leading that final charge. Others believe he ordered his men to fight without him, choosing to die in silence somewhere underground. When the sun rose over Iwo Jima on March 26th, the island was finally declared secure. Out of more than 21,000 Japanese defenders, only 216 were taken alive. Nearly the entire garrison had fought to the death. The Marines had suffered too, almost 7,000 killed and over 19,000 wounded. For the first time in the Pacific War, American losses exceeded those of the enemy. As the surviving Marines looked over the blackened landscape, the flag still flew from Mount Suribachi, tattered, smoke-stained, but unyielding. It was the only color left on the island. The battle for Iwo Jima was over, but its cost would echo far beyond that volcanic shore. When the guns finally fell silent, Iwo Jima looked less like an island and more like the surface of another world. Every ridge, every crater, every grain of sand had been scorched, shredded, or buried under the weight of bombardment. The air was thick with sulfur, smoke, and the smell of decay. Dead bodies, American and Japanese, lay side by side in shallow graves or in the open, their faces dusted with volcanic ash. The sea, once blue, had turned black with oil and blood. For the Marines who survived, there was no celebration, only exhaustion. They had fought longer and bled more than they ever imagined possible for a patch of rock barely 8 square miles wide. Yet, to the men who planned the war in the Pacific, Iwo Jima was far more than a battlefield. It was a prize. The island's 3 airfields were now in American hands. From them, B-29 superfortresses could launch bombing raids directly on Japan. And more importantly, crippled bombers returning from those raids could now land safely instead of plunging into the ocean. In the months that followed, over 2,400 B-29s made emergency landings on Iwo Jima. Tens of thousands of airmen owed their lives to the ground bought by the Marines at such terrible cost. Military engineers worked quickly to clear wreckage, bury the dead, and rebuild the runways. Within weeks, the first American aircraft touched down, a sight that turned the island from a tomb into a tool. For the United States, Iwo Jima became an unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Pacific, a forward base that brought Japan's home islands within striking distance. But the cost remained staggering. In 36 days of combat, nearly 26,000 American casualties, including 6,121 dead, were recorded. The Japanese garrison, 21,000 strong, was effectively annihilated. Every company, every platoon, every rifle squad had been torn apart. Some units that had landed with 250 men ended with fewer than 40 standing. Medics worked around the clock, often under fire, to save the wounded. Field hospitals overflowed with Marines missing limbs, eyes or half their faces, their bandages blackened with ash. On ships offshore, the wounded lay in long rows, whispering to each other through morphine haze. Some asked who had survived. Others wanted to know if the flag still flew on Suribachi. It did, and that flag, captured by Joe Rosenthal's lens, began its own journey. The photograph of 6 men raising it became front-page news across the United States within days. For a nation still bleeding from years of war, it was a moment of unity, courage, and endurance. The Iwo Jima flag-raising was used to rally morale, to sell war bonds, and to honor the Marines who had fought on that black sand. 3 of the 6 men in the photograph, Strank, Block, and Sousley, had already been killed in combat before the photo was even published. The survivors, Hayes, Gagnon, and Bradley, were sent home to help raise money for the war effort. To the American public, Iwo Jima became a symbol of unbreakable resolve. But for those who had fought there, it was not a symbol. It was memory. Memory carved in fire, blood, and stone. For General Kuribayashi, though dead, his defense had achieved something no Japanese officer before him had managed. He had inflicted greater casualties on the invader than his own army suffered. His tactics, tunnel warfare, coordinated fire, and refusal of banzai charges until the end, would influence Japanese strategy on Okinawa Just weeks later, the island was won. But the lessons of Iwo Jima were only beginning to unfold. In the months after the battle, Iwo Jima became both a fortress and a cemetery. Across its black sands, rows of wooden crosses stretched in every direction. Engineers flattened sections of ground for makeshift burial plots, each marked by a helmet or a rifle driven into the earth. Chaplains moved among them, reading prayers over names they could barely pronounce, their words carried away by the wind. For many Marines, closure never came. The island's volcanic soil was too unstable, too scarred by shell fire to recover every fallen man. Thousands remained entombed in the tunnels beneath, sealed alongside the soldiers who had once sworn to hold them. In time, Iwo Jima itself became their grave. On the Japanese side, families waited for letters that would never arrive. Most received only a short notice. Your son fought bravely and died honorably for the emperor. Few learned what had truly happened, that their sons had been ordered to die on a barren island that no longer existed as it once had. In Tokyo, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi was posthumously promoted. Emperor Hirohito personally praised his defense, calling it a great honor to the empire. But among Japan's military elite, Iwo Jima was both admired and feared, proof that even the most brilliant defense could not stop America's advance. For the United States, Iwo Jima became a test case. Every lesson learned, the need for deeper bombardment, better flamethrowers, improved coordination between tanks and infantry, would be applied to the next and bloodiest battle of all, Okinawa. And yet, as the Pacific War dragged toward its final chapter, the question remained, had it all been worth it? By mid-1945, B-29 raids launched from Iwo Jima had devastated much of Japan's industrial heartland. The island's airfields became lifelines for bombers crippled over Tokyo, Nagoya, or Osaka. Commanders justified the enormous loss of life by pointing to the thousands saved in the air. But among the Marines who had survived, few thought in terms of strategy. When they remembered Iwo Jima, they remembered faces, friends who had vanished in smoke, the sound of shovels digging through sand, the silence after the shelling stopped. Many never spoke of it again. Those who did, decades later, often said the same thing. It was hell. The U.S. Marine Corps recognized 27 Medal of Honor recipients for their actions on Iwo Jima, more than for any other battle in its history. 13 were awarded posthumously. The heroism was undeniable, but so was the price. The flag that once flew over Mount Suribachi was eventually brought home. It was displayed at the Marine Corps Museum in Quantico. Its edges torn, its colors faded, but its symbolism intact. For Americans, it represented triumph through sacrifice. For the Japanese, it represented the futility of defiance against overwhelming might. In the years that followed, the island itself changed hands multiple times. U.S. forces occupied it until 1968, when it was formally returned to Japan. By then, the war's scars had been covered by new vegetation, but the tunnels still remained, silent reminders of a battle that had claimed nearly 30,000 lives in just over a month. Today, Iwo Jima stands empty. No civilians, only a few caretakers and monuments. The wind still carries the smell of sulfur, and the black sand still clings to boots the way it did in 1945. Each February, veterans from both nations gather at the island's memorial. They stand together, not as enemies, but as survivors. Men bound by an experience that words can never fully describe. The island that once divided them has become a place of shared memory, a reminder that victory and loss on Iwo Jima were the same thing. In the long shadow of history, Iwo Jima stands as more than a battle. It stands as a reckoning. The island was only 8 square miles of volcanic ash, yet it became one of the bloodiest pieces of ground ever fought over. Every grain of its black sand bears the memory of men who believed they would never leave it alive. For the Americans, Iwo Jima was proof of the terrible cost of victory. It showed what the Pacific War had become. Not a struggle for territory, but a fight for endurance, for survival, for the right to keep moving forward no matter the cost. For the Japanese, it was a symbol of duty taken to its ultimate end. Courage bound by hopelessness, sacrifice beyond reason. General Kuribayashi's defense was brilliant, but it also revealed the fatal truth of Japan's wartime spirit. Valor could not overcome overwhelming firepower. The image of the flag atop Mount Suribachi endures not because it marks triumph, but because it captures something deeper. The moment when human will refuse to collapse, even amid devastation. Those 6 men, bent against the wind, raising that flag together, represented every soldier who fought and died on that island, on both sides. Decades later, the world still looks to Iwo Jima as a mirror of courage, futility, and the unimaginable weight of war. The battle ended on March 26, 1945, but the echoes of that struggle still drift across the Pacific. They remind us that victory is never free, that beneath every flag raised in triumph lies a mountain of sacrifice, and that on the black sands of Iwo Jima, the line between glory and grief was forever erased.